here in the perimeter, there are no stars. Out here, we is stoned, immaculate.
Hello and welcome. This is the C86 show. This is David Eastaugh. As you know, we love a special guest. This week it's going to be the turn of Big Flame because I recently spoke to their guitarist Greg Keeffe to find out more about life, love, poetry and all that other groovy stuff. A life in music and also what happens when the band finishes. Plus, Big Flame have recently or about to have their BBC John Peel sessions released on the Precious Recordings of London. They did 4 Peel sessions. And yes, it's been beautifully packaged together by the Precious Recordings team, which is basically Nick, which is, I'll put the link in the notes below. But you're going to find out more about Greg and also Big Flame and much more. Anyway, after several minutes of interesting but casual chat, we get down to the exciting subject of the early formative years. Greg, it's over to you.
Yeah, well, I was born 1963, David, so quite similar, really. I had elder sisters, so it was David Bowie, Roxy, when my childhood, and then really in the Beatles, I suppose. And then punk, of course. I was 14 in 77, punk was everything to me. It made so much sense to me at the time. And so, I was very big into punk. I followed the Clash around. Saw the Clash probably 30 times, maybe more.
Blimey, you got your fill of the Clash, didn't you?
Yeah, and then only they were in the early days, really up to about 1980, and then I was into the Gang of Four, and then Factory, obviously from Manchester, so I was into Factory Records, so got into particularly Certain Ratio. Used to hang around with them, and postcard things as well were good. So I was into that, and but I was also I got into a lot of jazz and things. When Big Flame was on, which makes us slightly unusual for an indie band, that we had sort of references that were elsewhere.
Yes, well, absolutely. I know having an older brother or sister has a massive impact in one's life, I realise, because I'm the youngest of 3, and it was my older brother who I sort of looked up to. He was 7 years older, so he was good at football, but he also had this mysterious and exciting record collection. Remember, this is the 70s, and he was into prog rock. This was that kind of period that he went through that sort of corridor, and and I became quite mesmerized by these kind of albums at the time. So yes, it was, you'd sneak into his room and listen to Yes and Genesis, Wishbone Ash, all those classics. But he did have Sergeant Pepper and Goodbye Yellow Brick Road, which were 2 other albums that were sort of, I was 12, 13 at the time. I thought they were just amazing, some songs on there. Because the Beatles, when you think about it, had only just broken up, really. And yeah, it felt like a very different period, as well. So it was strange in a lot of ways. Yes, when you sort of think, like 1973, 74, you think the Beatles had only just broken up, but it was already Band on the Run and, Wolves and, yeah.
I think time seemed to go a lot slower in those days. I think now time is going faster,
Yes, well, it does seem,
We had less media, didn't we? And we relied on like record covers or the NME
Yes.
for information, and information was quite hard to get, and it was jealously guarded by people who had it, So people had elder brothers were into, Led Zeppelin. I didn't really know Led Zeppelin, so I always felt a bit left out because I only knew Bowie and Roxy and things, because and so and so yeah, there was a sort of a lack of media really, which made it very mysterious all the time, really.
Did you used to do the kind of Saturday morning, Saturday afternoon, going in the city and going around all the second-hand record shops and charity shops looking for something, and after all those hours, you come back with one thing that you went, "Wow, this is amazing! I've done it." Or go to the record library, and that was the other thing.
Yeah, it's partly that. Or for clothes in the same way. If you could find some wraparound sunglasses or a pork pie hat or or a pair of skinny pants. You know what I mean. It was, you jealously guard those things.
Yes.
I made a lot of clothes myself out of, you know, with a sewing machine and stencils and stuff. I was really into sort of that sort of thing. Because I didn't really have a lot of money. I didn't come from a rich family, so I had to make it all happen myself. So,
Yes.
so
Well,
that
I do.
was good. The
I,
DIY thing's quite an interesting idea for kids, isn't it?
Well, it is, and also there was the God, I'd forgotten about this, but I know your mother and grandmother, if one was lucky enough to have those two, they would get those knitting patterns
Yeah.
and say, "Oh, do you want a jumper?" And you go, "Oh, yeah, I'll have that one." And off they would, 3 months later, they'd have knitted this jumper, which was, well, it's all right, thanks. I haven't got a jumper because the last
Yeah,
one's just fallen
I
apart.
got one of my sisters to knit me a pink mohair massive jumper, which I was very very proud of in the early in sort of 1977. It was an absolute winner, you know.
Yes, what it would have been. And it's funny, my partner went and lived in a squat in Leeds I think that was the 80s time, and sort of found herself hanging out with Chumbawamba, and a story of her sort of knitting this pink jumper and then stopping it down at No Bacon's mother's house on the way to a gig and having cups of tea and cake as they were there. And, this jumper was quite iconic for about 5 years before it completely fell apart. But, these projects did take a long time. It wasn't just go and ordering it online. It was quite a labor of love and work and a story, really. I think that
And
was the thing.
yeah, I think you're right that there was also it wasn't fast fashion, was it? That you actually cherished items, because they had meaning to you, or you'd made them or whatever. And I think that's quite a different thing from the experience of kids today who are used to having
Yes,
lots of things. I remember when I went to university. I realised I went to university. I owned three pairs of underpants when I went to university.
I know. And,
No,
and, and
I remember packing my bag with clothes in, and it was basically a supermarket carrier bag was about my limit of clothes, to go to.
yeah. And probably a cake that your mum baked to say, they'll, have something to eat, and that was that was it. It was weird. It was strange, yes, because like just on I'd forgotten about the clothes, but there would be you get a pair of jeans once a year, and then they would then get patches on them, and they would get slightly relegated a bit more and more, but you still weren't able to buy a new pair. But there's all the pictures of us with these massive patches on the knees because they were also what we played football in and
Yeah, yeah,
climbed trees and.
yeah.
Until they completely were too embarrassing for your parents to sort of take you out to the, some ruby wedding anniversary. That was it. These very bedraggled kids.
Well, I had all my hand-me-downs were from my sisters. I have three elder sisters and two younger brothers, so I got all this sort of women's clothes that I had to then alter or turn inside out or do something with to avoid there being flowers on it. And then later on, I was really proud to have flowers on it, and I'd wear women's anoraks and think, yeah, come and have a go if you think you're hard enough.
I know it's very important. So, what was the. Gig you went to? I'm now thinking it
Um,
probably was the Clash, but
First gig I went to was the Buzzcocks, actually.
right.
Yeah, so I went. Um, yeah, I went to see the Buzzcocks at Blackpool Mecca, actually, bizarrely. And a skinhead headbutted me actually and knocked me out, which was quite entertaining. I was 15 at the time, so yeah, and that was my first gig.
God, that would have put me off for life, I think.
Yeah.
But there you go, that does happen. So then we get to 79, which is a bit of a weird year because that's when Thatcher gets into power. But you're 16 at this stage. Do you
Yeah.
go on to A levels at this point?
Yeah, yeah. I passed my 11 plus, so I went to grammar school. You know, um, quite a rough grammar school, really. It's Catholic grammar school, so it was Christian brothers. We got molested, beaten.
Is this Manchester still?
I'm in Blackpool at the time now.
Oh,
So
right.
my mum and dad moved to Blackpool so I could take my 11 plus because they'd stopped the 11 plus in Manchester. And because I was clever, they thought I could go to grammar school, and they still had it in Blackpool. So I went there, took my 11 plus. It was the last year of 11 plus in Blackpool, and I went to this horrible Christian Brothers grammar school. But I did really, no, I did well. If you didn't do well, you got beaten to death. So I did really well.
Yes,
So
it's
and so yeah, so I went into sixth form there. Yeah, so I did my sixth form there. But I still felt very connected to Manchester even then. Blackpool's it's only 40 miles away, so it's not the end of the earth. And I'm a big Manchester United fan, so I used to go and watch United, at the weekend and get the.
blimey. So you, because bizarrely, even though I'm from East Anglia, Man United were the first my football team during the 70s. It was weird. It's a bit of a strange story because my brother, who I mentioned, his friends were like quite groovy. They were 7 years old, and when you're young, you think they're amazing. And one of them, Jenny Rusted, who had long blonde hair. I just thought, God, I love her. Anyway, I heard her say she liked George Best and probably Man United in a slightly casual way, and I thought, if I ever marry this woman, I'm going to have to just I'm going to support George Best. But little did I know they were dreadful at that point. But I
Yeah,
loved playing football, and then they all struggled, and then they got relegated the next season, which felt devastating. But then that big season when they got promoted from the second division
played
was,
beautiful football that season. It was fantastic. Yeah,
those great kind of, Jim Holes and Buck and
yeah,
Stepney, Paddy. And I often wonder what happened to Paddy Roach, actually, quite on
yeah.
a frequent level, really. But but then the 76, FA Cup final, which was a
Yeah,
disaster.
it was and there were good times, and obviously football violence was sort of entertaining if you weren't so much involved in it.
Yeah, I came to see them play in Norwich and also at Ipswich, and they were really poor on those seasons they
Yeah,
got relegated.
I once went. I saw them away at Ipswich on a Monday night or a Wednesday night, or something. We lost 6-0, and
Oh,
Gary Bailey saved two penalties. It was like a crazy game.
well, I went to that. I was in the North Stand. I went with my dad, and it was one of those because Dave Sexton was the manager, and they were second, and they was like they could win, and they have a really good team. And then Ipswich just ran around them endlessly, and yeah, Kevin
Yeah,
Beattie missed two penalties, and I just couldn't believe it. They were just looked so ridiculous, actually.
yeah,
And I still watch the highlights of that. You can watch it on YouTube, and it all comes back. It's like how they just got carved up endlessly. But
yeah.
yes, I know that was Dave Sexton. Yeah. So did you see Man United during the dock period?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I saw them. I went to my first game in 1970, I think. So, and so I haven't missed many games since the early 80s actually, but I went quite a lot in the 70s too.
Yes.
Ticket now, so I go every. I've had I've had a season ticket since I was in Big Flame. I had it when I was in Big Flame, so I've had it for 40 years as well. Season ticket.
It is quite interesting. I've got a lot of books just up there about Man United and Alex Ferguson and Too Good. There's a great book called Too Good to Drop, I think. And then the next book about them getting promoted. So yeah, it was good. So what did you? Oh God, that's that. So then, what did you do at university? What was your subject?
Oh, I got really bad advice from a monk, which was terrible because anyone who knew me knew I shouldn't. I ended up doing engineering at university, and I never went in ever. So I just basically on the first day I realized I wasn't interested, and I just wanted to be in a band. So I just thought, if this gets me 3 years grant, I'll I'll continue doing it. So I just used to do the band, and I never went to a single lecture. Probably went to about 10 lectures in 3 years, and just took the exams every year and swatted for them in the shortest length of time possible.
Yes.
But
'Cause
bizarrely, I end up a professor, which is even more bizarre. So
yeah, well, these things, Amelia Fletcher, and it's probably one of the other indie pop people who's also went very academic as well as still having her love of music. So during that kind of early 80s period, it had been, obviously you're at university, gets the grant, which is amazing, and probably housing benefit. And you
yeah.
can sign on the dole during Christmas and Easter, which just sounds amazing now. Good times or what? But then there was the Falkland War, the miners' strike, Greenham Common. There was did you have a sense of doom about the 80s at that stage?
Yeah, I think I really did. Yeah, yeah. I used to. I was in CND at one time, did a bit for Young Socialists at one time, and yeah, it was they were very grim times, weren't they? Especially in Manchester. Manchester was, it's very vibrant these days, but I used to walk around, this sort of post-industrial mess, thinking like, is this it? Is it all over? There wasn't even a spark of life. It was incredible. And so yeah, I think it was pretty grim, really. And I look back at the sort of difficulties of the miners' strike, and it just looked like I couldn't see a future either with like organized socialism or with Thatcherism. I just felt that somehow one was like so far in the past, of miners' communities and stuff. I just felt that I didn't really know where I belonged at the end of the miners' strike.
No, it was quite a painful experience, really, and yes, just endless like rioting in various cities as well. And yeah, I mean, did you at that stage? I mean, you're at university. Had you bought your guitar at that point and
Yeah, I was in a band at school in Blackpool, so I played bass then. So I knew how to play bass. So we started a band in our class, and everyone said, "Who can play an instrument?" I just lied and said I could play bass because it looked easy because it had four.
yes,
So I managed to. I didn't have any school dinners for a year, and saved up all the money from the school dinners to buy a bass guitar. So
yes. Well, at least you
and and
you you
then
didn't
and
have to
then
eat the liver, which was horrible in those days.
and then when I went to uni, I wasn't in a band, but Dil and myself, Dil, the drummer in the band, we end up in the same hall of residence because we're the only two people to put punk rock as our only interest on the application form for halls.
Right.
So we ended up in the same flat. Obviously, they're trying to pair people up with similar interests.
Yes, they're
So,
quite.
so,
So
so
the
me and Dil.
accommodation at university in those days was quite grim. I know the one at the UEA. I don't know. There was a rumor that had been based on a sort of European prison design, but it was just it's been knocked down now because it was that grim. But what was your accommodation like?
Yeah, well, we only stayed in it for the first term, but it was known as the Toblerones. It was sort of a triangular brick thing with a sort of roof that reached the ground, and we had a ground floor flat in there. And yeah, and it was great meeting Dill because we're into the same things, but we'd had such different upbringings. So that was quite an eye opener for me, because Dill had
What?
he grew up on a hippie commune in Herefordshire, and I came from a sort of Irish Catholic big family,
Yes.
sort of diametrically opposite, and in some ways, but we met and
God.
into the same things, bizarrely.
So you learnt about sort of was it TVP and soya mince and barley cup and sort of teepees and talking sticks and ley lines. Did he?
Yeah.
Was it? Had he? Because I've spoke to a few people whose childhood was based in communities, and it was a bit confusing. Like the adults weren't always behaving the best at the time. There was a lot of dope smoking and the occasional broken marriage. Did he have a nice childhood in a community, or was it a bit difficult?
Yeah, I don't know. I think his dad was very technical, and his mother was very, sort of alternative. And I think he was sort of trapped somewhere in between the two, So because Dill's very rational and actually very technically orientated in lots of ways. So I think he found it difficult because I think he went to sixth form at a normal school in Birmingham because he went to live with his dad who'd left the commune. And so I think he had a bit of a shock going to a normal school after living in rural Herefordshire.
Right, blimey.
You need to get him on
Yes.
the show. Yeah, I shouldn't really talk for him, really.
No, no, but it's always interesting because there was a few people I spoke to whose kind of parents, got into, yeah, the hippie world. And some of it is quite good. There's a great documentary by, well, just a little documentary on the Global Village Trucking Company, who were a band in the 70s. And they had a commune, and they were all in a, they had the hippie bus and they went and played gigs and stuff like that. And it was, quite idyllic. But obviously, the men didn't behave terribly well, and the women ended up in the kitchen having babies and cooking.
Yeah, I
The
think it
usual
was.
thing.
Yeah, I think it was pretty similar for Dill's thing. I think as well. You know,
Yeah.
and obviously he had a sort of, you know, a very bohemian childhood, and mine was very much the opposite, really.
Yes, well, I suppose a lot of people have dreams and ambition when you're living in those communes, and people going off to India as if it's just like going to the shops, and you think, I
Yeah.
don't even know where India is. And the Marrakesh Express, and listening to, I don't know, Van Morrison and Joni Mitchell, and tripping out on, Grateful Dead records. It's quite different. Did you, on that Manchester front, were you into big bands like Joy Division at this stage?
Yeah. I saw Joy Division once, so and I'm quite proud of that. It was that's where I first met John Robb. Actually, that's the first time I met John Robb.
Yes, because he's from Blackpool, isn't he?
Yes, yeah. So it was at the Imperial Hotel in Blackpool. So I saw John, met John there. So I think they're on with Section 25, and maybe I've got a feeling it might be an orchestral manoeuvres in the dark, but I may be wrong there.
Yes.
But yes, so yes, and I was sort of into all things Manchester really, because I felt a longing to be back there after I left as a kid, and Man United to sort of get me attached to that in a way, and I had and my dad was sort of an Irish pub singer part time, so I grew up with Irish music, and he'd tell stories about wild nights in Manchester with the Dubliners, and you know, and I sort of vaguely dreamed of having something similar.
Yes. And at that stage, had you met Stephen Morrissey or Johnny Marr?
No, but I did meet Morrissey in a bar once. But I was introduced to him by Linda from Ludus,
Right.
and she said, "Oh, this is Stephen." And I went, "Oh, hi, Stephen." He just sort of pouted at me and looked away, and I never thought anything of it. And then years later, I realised it was Morrissey. Yeah, that was my only connection with him, really.
And had that sort of the estate in Manchester, had that developed, the Hume estate? Was that
Yeah,
a thing at
yeah.
that stage in the
Well,
early 80s?
there's very little left of the 1960s. Well, there's nothing left. Well, there's a couple of tower blocks left of the 1960s estate, but there's there's basically the red bricks, the 1930s little bit is still there, but basically it's all been redeveloped into a actually quite a successful neighborhood. Actually,
Mm.
it was quite a good master plan by Mills Beaumont Levy, and they've done quite a good job in getting a good mix of social housing and private rented stuff and stuff. It's quite good. Yeah.
What was it like in the early 80s? Because there's a guy, a photographer, I think Richard Davis, God, I should have
Yeah,
known,
yeah.
who's done, and he obviously photographed a lot of that area and people, and they're so evocative, those photographs he's got. Yes, had it developed, had it already sort of become a scene in a way during that period?
Yeah, well, I moved in Christmas 1981 into a squat. Me and Dil left the Halls of Residence. We went looking for a squat. I we broke into one of the flats using a bread knife because the walls were made of cardboard. You could in the front you could cut a hole to get in with a bread knife, bizarrely, and then we powered it up with a massive 100 amp fuse in the fuse board and started living in it. It was like it was it was terrifying, to be honest, living there. It was really particularly in 81, 82. It was pretty. You could be beaten to near death almost any night of the week if you were in the wrong place at the wrong time.
Right.
You know, there were some serious people around with serious mental health issues. It was really dangerous, and everywhere you walked was unsurveyed. So you were walking home thinking this could be the last time I walk anywhere. It was really dangerous, and then the flats were absolutely freezing cold. They had electric heating that you couldn't afford to put on. It was dense concrete, and it was, oh man, it was so cold in those flats. They were like Greenland.
Right. My God. It does. I mean, they photograph beautifully and the characters look
Yeah.
amazing.
Yeah, and it was obviously Wilson Wormsley. It was an interesting design based on Bath Crescents. It was it's sort of beautiful hubris in a way. In the sense that these modernists thought they could sort of reinvent a Georgian city in in situ concrete. So
Right.
quite
Concrete was
interesting.
the wonder material because in the 60s or yeah, the UEA had the ziggurats, and
Yeah,
that was
yeah,
again,
right. Yeah.
and all those and they've got 5-year project to sort of renovate them all at the moment. So it's a hell of a job because obviously it started to look very shabby and it's not great, is it? But
Yeah, and the flats could have been beautiful. They were a lovely idea, but but they were just badly made. With a system that was, not really didn't have any quality assurance. So panels didn't fit and walls didn't line up with panels, and so it was always drafty and cold. But I love living there because it was sort of completely free. You could have a party any night of the week and nobody would complain. You could stick your speakers out the window and play dub reggae at 200 decibels at 2 o'clock in the morning and have a party outside, and nobody even batted an eyelid because there were no
no.
people in there. They're just weirdos and students, and so it was really good, and a lot of rastas. So there was always good music around.
Yes. Had you gone to any festivals at this stage, the Stonehenge or early Glastonbury's or the 80s?
No, in fact, I've hardly been to any festivals in my life, to be honest. I think I'm a pre-festival sort of
I
person.
just wondered with Dil whether he had sort of said, look, you've got to go.
No, I don't think he was very anti-hippie. I think he'd had enough of hippiness.
Yes, this is often
Yeah.
I've noticed having hippie friends, their kids were like, oh wow, they just want to get a job with
I think he
with
he
Aviva.
was running away from hippiness, and I was running away from Catholicism. I think
Yes.
what happened when we met, we could both find a new future.
So then, big 83. I always think because there was the very simplistically punk, post punk. It was the new romantic goth started, Paisley scene started. Then 83, the Smiths appeared, and this was also the year of Big Flame, wasn't it?
Yeah, yeah. I think Dill had been in a band with Alan before called the Dog Musicians, and they were sort of like a sort of student band really to play sound a bit like Talking Heads or something. They were very polite, alternative music, and Dill just drummed in it. And then when that finished, I think Dill suggested to Alan that I should be in the band, and I wasn't actually very close to Dill at the time. I think we'd fallen out a bit, or we'd just drifted apart, and so and so Dill and I went to the pub, and he sort of tried to explain to me how to get on with Alan.
Well, that's excellent at
And
that age as well. That's fantastically
so we had
mature.
this chat in the pub about how I was going to have I was going to be asked to be in the band, but I was going to get a one-off sort of test audition, and if I fell out with Alan, it'd be off. So he gave me this pep talk, saying, you've got to be a good boy, and not mouth off too much because I'm quite a big mouth as it is, and so yeah, and so Dylan and I made a list of all the things that the band wouldn't be and who it was against. So we didn't say anything about what it was going to be like at first. We just said all the things we hated about what was happening to music. And so we decided to do the exact opposite of whatever. So goth in particular, we were sort of we both liked the idea of ideology, and and we always felt goth didn't have any ideology really, and that sort of upset us. We thought they were betraying punk really with that.
Right.
So we decided we'd be ideological first and music second, if you
Right.
like.
Yeah, that was the 80s, wasn't it? That was very
Yeah.
important.
Yeah.
I do remember, anarchist groups arguing for days, weeks on end. Little groups like the SWP and Direct Action Movement, and you're just thinking it was such a tiny thing, but they spent so much time. The little details. You're thinking, you're still, mate. You're a long way off the revolution at this stage. And but it was very important, wasn't it? And people knew stuff, and you get
Yeah.
called a Trotsky. And you say, I don't really know what that means, being a trot, or
Yeah.
I don't know. They would you'd have these tell me that, oh, yeah, I probably am. I don't know. I never thought about that before. And I didn't know anything about the Spanish Revolution. I felt quite inadequate at times. I just nodded and tried to change the subject onto something else. But
Yes, and so yeah, and we started the band, and I had to really learn the guitar because I'd never really played it before that, so I had to learn to play it really quickly, So
yes. So who was the kind of the driving force behind the band?
well, it's difficult. It's difficult to say because with the three of us, we all had our own things. See, Alan was very musical, and very talented, and he could make a tune out of anything. You know what I mean. He's that sort of guy. So that was quite useful in terms of making stuff happen. Um, Dil was really good at the graphics. All the graphics were Dil. So Dil was good at the graphics, and Dil was good at ideology, as well. So that was good. And he was an interesting drummer. He never played the same thing twice. Without being rude, but
Yes.
he had his own style, and then a lot of the songs started with the guitar riffs. So I invented the guitar riffs, and then we built the songs usually around the guitar. So we all had a, and I invented the song titles generally. So
Yes. Which
so I
John
made
Peel
the
would
song
have loved.
titles. So which I always quite like. And so yeah, so it was a three-way thing really. Me and Dil were very loud. Alan was very considered, and I think that did lead to. I don't think Alan had as big a voice as perhaps he should have done at times because me and Dil, we could make people, we could, when we got going, we could really. It was like the hardest hail storm when we got going. In terms of, you know, we had a million ideas every minute, the pair of us, and we never shut up. So that was added to it, and we're probably unbearable most of the time, I think.
Yes, well, the three piece is quite interesting, isn't it? Your famous ones like Jimi Hendrix Experience, Cream, Motorhead. It's quite an interesting dynamic, and also a few years later, Galaxy 500. The voting of a band can be quite tricky. Did you have to have Did you have to have consensus within the band, or could you
Yeah,
have voting rights?
yeah, yeah. I think we did. Yeah, and it was quite. It could be quite. There were quite a lot of arguments. We argued a lot about things, but we shared the vision. I think we shared the vision. So we always let the vision win for the band. And I think that was probably why it lasted. Really, I think otherwise it might have been more difficult. We had a few fights along the way, but nothing too severe.
No.
But we decided to fight everyone else. I think one thing we're quite good at was fighting everyone else.
And had like Factory, New Order, Tony Wilson, were you influenced by that kind of scene, the New Order
Yeah.
sound?
Well, yeah, I was quite good friends with Ratio. I work. Me and Dill both worked at the Hacienda, so we were both glass collectors at the Hacienda. So and I was on Factory Records later on with Meat Mouth, another band. So yeah, um, I wasn't particularly a New Order fan. And I even lost interest with certain Ratio after about '83. I think they got a bit too twee for me, a bit too Roy Ayers. I like the earlier sort of alternative and sort of less more sort of industrial stuff that they did. You know, I always hoped they'd be more like Cabaret Voltaire than Roy Ayers. You know, but they did their thing. So yeah, Factory was. a really big thing, in the city, and the hacienda in those early days was great because it was free to get in every night, if you remember, and it was drinking till 2 every night, and you'd be wandering around this club, and there'd be 20 people in there, and you knew everybody. So it was a good place to meet people at first,
Well,
before,
yes.
you know.
Did you see Madonna there?
I did, yeah, yeah,
Was
yeah.
that an underwhelming experience?
No, it's great. It was really good. Talked to her afterwards.
Right, blimey. There you
So
go.
there you
Just
go. But
little
she
did
wasn't
we
famous
know.
then. She wasn't famous. I think I bought her a beer. So
God, you could if Parky was still going, you could have
and
put that
we
down
asked
as
her
one of
to
those chats, couldn't you?
we asked her to sing on These Boots Are Made for Walking.
As Big Flame.
Yeah,
My God, if only you'd done that.
I know. And she gave me a phone number, but it never it rang out.
My God. I mean, I'm now speechless. Big Flame and Madonna on the same records.
That was our because if you remember. A certain ratio were meant to do one with Grace Jones, weren't they? They meant to do Houses in Motion, I think, with Grace Jones, and that never came off. And so we always thought we'd do These Boots Are Made for Walking with Madonna.
Blimey. And was she keen? Was she up for it at this
Well, she
time?
seemed it at the time.
Well, you bought her a
She was
beer,
just being
didn't you?
polite, really. She
Well,
wasn't
no.
famous then, though. You see, that was her first ever gig, really.
Well, I know. We wouldn't have known anything about this young, very sort of energetic woman from New York. So yeah, it's yeah, that's a hard one to digest. God, that would have been that would help the precious recordings of London no end, wouldn't they? If there was a
Yeah.
sort of the exclusive hidden track that's been in the vaults for 40 years. These boots are made for walking.
Yeah.
God,
Well,
well, it's never. Perhaps you could still. Well, not. You'd
yeah,
have to do a different
we
phone
actually
number.
have a version sung by my now wife. Actually, she sung it instead. So we have a version somewhere of my now wife singing on it.
Well, it's a happy ending, and that's the main thing. So when you went and did your first sort of 3-track EP or single, Sync,
Yeah.
had you come on John Peel's radar at that stage?
No, no, not at all. So really, it was that record that we sent to John Peel, and the rest is history. John. I think the amazing thing about John Peel was that he listened to stuff. I think you could we sent it to all sorts of people, but not many people listened to it. But he actually took time to listen to new music, which is amazing, really, isn't it, for some top guy? I don't, he didn't have a load of kids listening to it, saying to him, "I've just heard this one." I think he just listened to them himself.
Yes, I think he was the curator of that show, or and John
And
Waters as
John
well.
Walters, yeah,
Walters, yeah, it was amazing, and I think that between them they were very good, and I kind of could relate to both of them because John Walters would often feel like I don't like this, but I think it needs to be played because there's something which is quite unique about it, whether it's you know
yeah,
Napalm Death or Bolt Throw or the Bundu Boys. He often liked the idea of stuff. He wouldn't probably go home and play it. Whereas John Peel seemed to actually enjoy it at the same time, knowing that it's quite a unique thing and quite unusual. And it wasn't going to get on daytime Radio 1 on the Simon Bates, happy hour or
he
whatever it
was
was.
he was really good to us, actually. And we played an ICA Rock Week, and he turned up, and he was like, it was quite interesting. He was quite shy. He was like a fan.
Yes.
So he's like, rather than, I was, you expected to come in and go, yeah, it's my rock week, and I put you on, and aren't you lucky? But actually, he came in and he was like, "Oh, you were really good tonight. I really like the guitar sound."
Yes,
He
it
was
was
quite,
quite.
quite self-effacing, really, which is surprising, isn't it?
Well, it is, and yeah, I mean, I am staggered. Well, a couple of nights ago, I did an interview with the lead singer of a band called Gentle Giant, who I have to say, it was quite hard work to listen to it. But then, it turned out that John Peel was a massive fan, and they had quite a few sessions with Peel in the 70s, which again, that eclectic kind of like, wow, I didn't ever know that. I knew Gentle Giant a bit, but yes, I didn't realise. But it kind of just made me even more impressed that he was just so I don't know. He wasn't following the fashion, and he was obviously just thinking, "I'll put this on next to some other completely random track, which has nothing to do with this kind of strange proggy band." So I did like that. And as a listener, I think I had a bit of a short attention span, so I quite like the shows where they were just so random and so different. And when people said, "Oh, it's just indie pop," he thought, "Well, not really. I mean, he would play a '50s, like." I don't know, a track on the, a sort of blues track, or one on the Kent record label, Charlie Records, or, Ivor Cutler or Daft Bluggy from the Welsh lands. And it was just always interesting. I think that was, and even if I thought I didn't really like it, I'm pleased to have heard it all. I mean, I did like a lot of it.
Yeah, no, in the early days of hip hop, I got most of my inspiration, from John Peel. I used to go and buy all the hip hop 12 inches that he played, because it was really hard to find out about hip hop in the early days. So
Very, yes, I did the
Julie
same.
B
And
and Steady B and the Fat Boys and all those guys. I was mad on those things, and the only way to hear them was on John Peel.
yeah, I remember he had somebody called Roxy Shante that he
Yeah.
played, and then there was Tila Rock, and as you said, the first Public Enemy track, and he even played LL Cool J. I mean, it was just like, wow, this is weird. And there was a compilation series called Street Sounds that he
Yeah,
seemed
Street
to,
Sounds was really good as well. Yeah.
and because I made the mistake of sometimes buying the album by a band and realizing that one good track was the one that John Peel played, the rest of it was like,
Yeah,
oh,
definitely
drat.
the case.
But yeah, it was good. Anyway, God. So then your first single, John Peel picks up on it. And then did you bring out the next EP, Rigger, or did you do a John Peel session before then?
And we did a John Peel session before then. Yeah. It was on the day of my last exams, my last finals exam.
The 16th of July, 1984.
Yeah, well, it was recorded in June. So we
Oh,
had to get
right.
to London by 2 o'clock. So I asked at the exam meeting, how long do you have to stay in the exam in order to it to count as attendance? Otherwise, I'd have to send my grant back. And they said you have to do 30 minutes. So
Right.
30 minutes into the exam, I walked out and got in a van and went to London to record that first session.
Crikey, you were pushing it really, weren't you, on that one? Yes, well, there you go. 9 o'clock start, rock and roll. And then Deborah, Man of Few Syllables.
Yeah.
Sargasso, my God, had these were the one, quite a few of those tracks then come out on the, oh, actually, it is the, so is that the same recordings that came out on the second release then?
No, no, we went into Cargo in Rochdale, and the famous John Briley produced the Man of Few Syllables the Rigger CD, that's 7 inch, and that was really good. It was really good to be in the studio with him because the BBC was a bit, it was a bit stuffy. You know,
Yes.
dealing with that first session, trying to get the sound we wanted. We didn't really know how to do it, and John Briley just he sort of understood what we were trying to do in a sort of semi-humorous way. He sort of every time we said turn it louder, he just sort of burst out laughing and turned it louder, you know. And so I think it's one of my favorite recordings because it's so live, and
Yes.
that second single. So I really like that one, and I really like the fact that in Man a Few Syllables, if you listen at the end, I broke a string halfway through, but I just keep playing, and so it's recorded. It's 5 strings that have been recorded, and you can hear the string rubbing against the pickup right at the end if you listen, if you know what you're listening to. And so I
Yes,
like
this
the
is,
fact that it wasn't perfect. I quite liked the idea of it not being perfect.
yes. So by the time you came around to sort of 85, you had the famous Dale Griffin to produce Mott the Hoople Man. What was that session like at the
Yeah,
BBC? Was he okay? Because I know a lot of people generally go, bit of a grumpy man.
he was very grumpy with us. Yeah, he was very grumpy with us, and I think I can't really remember so much, but I think I just thought I'm gonna turn the guitar up so loud in the studio that he won't be able to do anything with it. you know.
Right.
So I just put, I used to have this poker amp, this little 12-inch combo thing. I just used to turn all the knobs to maximum. And so I didn't have any effects. I just did that. And so it was just so noisy. And because we recorded it semi-live, it was on all the other mics as well. I think he got a bit fed up because there wasn't much he could do.
Yes.
Record it, yeah.
And
But
this
but
is and this is a session that starts with "All the Irish Must Go to Heaven" and finishes with "These Boots Are Made for Walking." So, does this feature your wife?
no, he
Oh,
doesn't know. That's another version.
right.
But which we recorded for this at the time we did the single, which was Rigger, which is a
Y-
single basically based on that session. And that was recorded in Chorlton, South Manchester, and I actually I like the sound on that one actually. I think that third single has the nicest guitar sound, I think.
Right. And at this stage, had you started to get in the transit van and start the touring circuit of the indie clubs of?
We played you know a lot of places. I don't know how many gigs we did, but we probably in the 3 years we probably played 100 more than 100 gigs, maybe 150. I don't know, quite a lot. So we're out every week going somewhere in a transit van.
Yes.
You know,
Uh,
the
and did
first
you enjoy? And did you enjoy touring at this stage?
I absolutely loved it. Yeah, I think I just thought the whole point of Big Flame. I wasn't particularly interested in the records, to be honest. I like the idea of it being performance art. You know, that it was some sort of thing that couldn't be replicated really in a physical form. You know, you had to be there. You know, and I got that from the Clash really, from seeing the Clash so many times. Every time you saw the Clash, it was a celebration. You know, and I sort of wanted Big Flame to be sort of like that really.
Yes. And what was the typical fan of Big Flame like as you travelled around the country?
Yeah, usually male, but not always. Um, Usually people like Jerry Thackeray, you know, the legend.
Yes.
You know, he was a big Flame fan. You know, and he's sort of typical of the sort of person who he was, like Nicky Wire out of the Manics. You think of those people, and yeah, it was people who were searching for different things out of music, like to be weird, I think.
Yeah. I mean, at that stage, we'd got Stump, Bogshed, Big Flame, and then the wedding present coming along with their very excitable David Gedge. Were you feeling a bit of a mood? Did you feel a bit on a zeitgeist moment at this stage?
I did. Well, we Dil and I ran a nightclub in Manchester on a Thursday night called the Wild Club, and we put a lot of these bands played their first ever gigs at the Wild Club, So I don't know if we ever felt part of it, but we just felt we owed a duty to bring bands on. I think the thing was living in Hume. It was such a weird place and such a weird reality. That we always felt that all the other bands were very nice.
Yes.
Lovely. Like the wedding presents sort of come from suburban Leeds and sing about girlfriends, leaving them at the bus stop and things, and we were trying to change the world, and we always felt we were slightly on a different page, to a lot of those sorts of bands.
Yes, this is quite interesting, isn't it? Had you come across this guy called Edward Barton at this point, who was
Owen,
he'd,
yeah, yeah. Well, I know him as Owen, but yeah, Edward Barton. Yeah, we actually one of our first ever gigs was with him. We played the band on the wall with him right at the very start, probably before we had a single out. Yeah, so and he lived in Hume, so we knew him from there. He did some of the early photos were taken by him. So
right, because he was quite on the scene, wasn't he, as a character and a bohemian artist?
yeah, he's a lovely guy, Owen, and very talented and very interesting in lots of ways. He lives in Southport now, I think.
Right. Well, it has to happen. Then, I mean, as the mid-80s happened, it was coming and we were trundling through it. Red Wedge starts to appear, doesn't it? And that's sort of like another political movement. We'd had Rock Against Racism, but then Red Wedge. Were you as a band with massive ideology and Doc Marten boots? Were you kind of started to feel drawn to any political movement?
I think not really. No, I think we'd sort of painted ourselves into a weird corner where we sort of were becoming sort of anarchists. We weren't really. We just didn't feel like any of the parties were gonna solve the problems that we had. And I think that was it. And I'd so yeah, and the Redskins, and I think in Leeds people were a lot more focused on like Three Johns and Redskins and things like Chumbawamba you were talking about before. The 1 in 12 club in Bradford are very socialist orientated, weren't they? And I quite like that, but I think we felt slightly different from that as well. We we felt in a way it was just us against the world. That's part of how you make a three-piece work, I think, in a way.
Yes, I think a lot of people at the time didn't feel part of a scene, but from an outsider's point of view, it looked a bit. And then decades later, it's oh, of course you were, but probably at the time you're all very focused on your own issues and stuff. Did you ever have management at this stage?
No, we never had any management. No, we
A
did have a band.
label?
We were on Ron Johnson Records. We licensed our records to Ron Johnson, so we recorded them ourselves with our own money, and then we licensed it to Ron Johnson to put it out. Dave Parsons is a really nice person, and we sent him the first single. I'm not quite sure why we'd sent it to him, but anyway, he was one of the few people who said, "This sounds brilliant. Do you want to be on my record label?" And he wasn't actually doing a record label at the time, but his band he'd done a self-release on Ron Johnson before, so yeah, so we did run. So and yeah, we got Dave was fantastic, always really good to us, and nice and lovely person.
Yes.
Didn't want we didn't want any contracts. He didn't want any contracts. We just wanted to release a record, and he just said, "Yeah, whatever you want to do, you write the press releases. You do whatever you want." So he was good person to deal with.
Yes. And then your third Peel session, this was in November 85, two in a year. This is very exciting, isn't it? Is this the golden year for Big Flame?
It is, but that session's so weird. I don't even remember recording it, to be honest. And it just all those songs seem incredibly like, well, they don't sound like the finished version. So I don't know if we just made them up or whether we'd been. But so that third session is quite strange. But we were we were at the height of our powers then, really. Getting there, we're big enough to play. Things like ULU in London, and we could do proper large gigs. In Manchester we played the International, to
Right.
2,000 people. We could fill places then, and that was and that was good. And we had favourite places. So Glasgow, we always had a fantastic night in Glasgow. We obviously London, Manchester, Liverpool. We had favourite places to play. Nottingham was always a really good night, and so yeah, we were big enough to play proper venues by then, so that was quite good.
Yes, amazing. Did you used to have a regular support band with you at this stage?
If we yeah we used to have a range of support bands. We used to like the Mackenzies who were on. Ron Johnson. They were from
Yeah.
Glasgow. So well, Paul, the drummer, he lived in Manchester. So I met him at the Barbers um, one day, and then we got chatting, and then so we did quite a few gigs with the Mackenzies. Twang, who were another band who were on Ron Johnson, we did quite a lot of gigs with them at times. Age of Chance played with us
Yes.
quite a lot. Wedding Present as well played with us.
What about Jackdaw? Oh, I can't remember the rest of it. Jackdaw by
Crowbar. Yeah,
Yes.
I think we did. I think we played. I think we have played with them. I don't really remember. Um,
Did you play Glastonbury as an indie band?
no, we didn't do any. The only festival we did was the International Youth Year Festival in
Right.
Manchester, which was at Plattfields. That was fantastic because for some reason it was a Friday after. It was a Friday afternoon and evening, and it involved the apparently the highest level of truancy ever involved in secondary schools in Manchester in one day, where basically there wasn't a single kid at school. It was like it was something like the 5th of July 1985, and no kid went to school. And they had this International Youth Year Festival. It was so we played, we were on, I think Mark Ryan and the Creepers were on, Lima, maybe Simply Red or something like that. And yeah, it was a great. I quite like playing a festival because you could wear sunglasses and still see the fretboard.
Yes.
Quite nice, so you could look cool on stage and still see the fretboard. Whereas normally you can't wear sunglasses indoors on stage because you can't see the frets.
No, unless you're Lou Reed, but
Yeah,
it's a tricky one. And then, is it O'Neill Taylor and various
yeah,
other people? He brings together this famous 22 track C86 cassette that
yeah.
becomes the Enemy's
There's
runaway success.
there's a really interesting story about that because Neil saw us at Woolwich Poly, Thames Poly, and he came to see. He had a chat with me after the gig and said, "I'm going to make you famous because I'm going to put you on the cover of the NME. I'm going to make you famous because I think you're
Excellent.
absolutely amazing." And then he went in the office on Monday and found out we'd had a half-page article previously in the NME. And so he rang me up and said, I can't make you famous because I want someone who did." So he made he made what they called from East Kilbride, what are they called?
The Pastels?
Boots and Mary Chain. He made
Oh,
Boots and Mary Chain famous instead. So
right. Oh, well.
that was our chance of fame and fortune disappeared.
Were you ever on the front page of Melody Maker Sounds or NME?
We had a big we had a sort of two-pager in the NME, mid and the center spread sort of thing, but we never on. They had a flexi disc on the cover instead of us.
Right. That's tragic, isn't it?
Which is tragic.
I used to love those 7-inch singles on the NME. I still got quite a
Yeah,
few. There was a
yeah.
great one with Husker Du on, which I always thought was Ticket to Ride, I believe. And a one with, is it Stansky? The motorcade sped on.
Oh yeah, I remember that. Yeah, that's right. Yeah, Double D
Yeah,
Starsky. Yeah,
that's right. So then, but then he sort of rings you up and
yeah.
says, "Do you want a track on the?" How does it work then when you get on a cassette with the
Yeah,
and
they rang us up and said, "Do you want to be on it?" And we really liked C81, so it was sort of a dream, really, because I just thought C81 had been so good.
yes,
I thought it'd be great to be on it, and basically what they offered us was 150 quid to go to a studio of our choice and record one song.
and you
So,
said that's
and we said,
fine. We
yeah,
can
that
do it for
sounds great.
20 and
Yeah.
yeah,
So we recorded it. We recorded it in Pluto Studios in Manchester, where the Clash had recorded Bank Robber.
right.
We thought that might be quite interesting. So we went there. I had terrible flu, I remember. So the record has loads of coughing on it because I was coughing while playing the guitar. So we kept it in the mix. But yeah, and then when we came outside, we put all the gear in the van, and we got in the van. We went back to the van, and there was 3 kids hot wiring the van. At the time, we had a bit of a fight outside, so
Right.
it was very entertaining recording, really.
Yes. And with an arrangement like that, do you just is that the fee and that's it, or do you get any kind of royalties from
Yeah,
this?
well, you apparently you get obviously you get performance and mechanical royalties. So depending on how many they sell, you get a small cut of that, and then you get a bit of money if it's played on anything that's PRS, the performing rights. So So I don't think we made much money out of it.
No. But then over the decades, that's been repackaged and you have appeared on various Cherry Red record compilations. Have you sort of found, the royalty checks, it's nearly up to 50 quid,
All 20 quid, yeah.
20
Every time
quid.
20 quid turns up. Yeah, it's fantastic. I know. I remember seeing we were on we're not on Spotify now because the record label we were on Spotify has broken Spotify's rules or something by mistake, and so we've been banned from Spotify. But when we're on Spotify, we made the band made £80 for a year's plays on Spotify.
Oh, well, there you go. That's
I think it was 10,000 plays, 80 quid.
yes. Well, I suppose yes.
So,
The John Peel's plays were probably a bit more entertaining. So then, 86. What's 86 like for the band at this stage? You do a fourth Peel session, don't you? On this is the 4th
yeah.
of May,
Oh, that was
1980.
yeah. I love that session. We'd just been on tour for a couple of weeks, so we're really super tight, And we went in, and we just the James Taylor Quartet were in the next studio. I seem to remember, or someone like
Right.
that. And we went in. We just switched everything on, and we said, "Record this," and we just played 4 songs in 10 minutes and packed up the gear. We were packing up the gear, and the James Taylor Quartet was still tuning the piano.
or just moving it.
We did it. So we recorded the whole thing in 8 minutes, just straight bang 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 bang, and first takes on them all because we're so tight. And so I absolutely love those last 4 songs on the session. We
And
did a
was that
version,
the
because the first version had been quite wimpy, really, and so.
sync? Yes, there you go.
Yeah,
So
and
that's
there's Testament to Slow Death of Youth Culture. I like I like the chance of doing cover versions on sessions. So we tried to do one on each of them. So we had these boots. Then we did Every Conversation on number 3, and then Wake Me Up Before You Go on number 4.
yes. Blimey, there you go. So number four's got Wake Me Up on.
Yeah, it has. Yeah, it's called
What's
Testament to Slow Death of Youth Culture. It's called.
right? I've got
Because
it.
we didn't
Yeah.
want to give Wham any royalties because we said it was plagiarized off Martha Reeves and Vandellas, so we thought we'd steal the famous royalties for it.
Yes,
So
well,
we put it down as traditional arrangement. So it goes it goes to some charity if you put traditional arrangement.
nice. And then a track called Tish.
Yeah, yeah.
How did that song come about?
Well, that's actually, yeah, it was actually called Fuck RTZ, but obviously we John Peel couldn't say fuck on the radio, so he asked us how to pronounce it, so we said Tish.
Excellent. And
Yeah.
then sort of 86, as this was recorded in kind of mid 86, then what happens to the band for the rest of the year at this stage?
Well, then we sit down after that tour and the session, and Dill said, I want to finish college and finish my architecture degree, and I can't do it if I'm in the band. And so we said, right, okay, let's finish the band. And so we plotted. We thought, well, what we'll do is we'll do a sort of 4-week tour to end it. So played September, and on the 10th of October we did the last gig at the Boardwalk in Manchester. £1 in, so it was like back to the old days.
Yes.
It was fantastic, and it was a beautiful end. Really, all the gigs were lovely celebrations of Big Flame, and that last gig at the Boardwalk, people from all over Europe had turned up to go to it, and it was just beautiful. It was sold out in, like, you couldn't sell things out then, but it was sold out within a day. People had gone to Piccadilly Records and bought the tickets, and it was beautiful, and before we went on, someone Dave from Ron Johnson came in and said, you sent me a ticket. No one's wanted the ticket. I've just got to tell them I was I was the record label boss. So he gave me the ticket. So I went outside, and there were like probably 500 or 600 people outside wanting to get in. So I just had this ticket. I said, "Who's next in the queue?" And this young girl went, "I think it's me." And so I gave her the ticket, and then that was it. She went in. It was such a lovely end to the.
God, that is beautiful.
Yeah.
There we go. And then did you go back to your flat in Hume to yes, say
Yeah,
goodbye to it? Was it a bit
we
like
had
the
a
With
party.
Nell and I finale, where With Nell and
We went
I?
to the hacienda afterwards, um, including my 13-year-old brother. It was an hacienda, which was very proud of, and then I went home and just thought, what the hell have I done,
It's
because
all over.
honestly, it was terrible. I think it had been so much part of my life, incredible, and a day hadn't gone by without thinking about the band, practicing, doing things for 3 years. You know what I mean? It's really serious engagement. We practice
Yes.
3 times a week, every week, or we're playing gigs. So we're probably playing 5 times every week. We're thinking about labels and artwork and new songs, and then suddenly you just wake up and there's just nothing.
No, it is a bit of a moment, isn't it, really? Did you go off and watch Betty Blue on a sort of mid-afternoon sort of viewing at the art?
Yeah, well, I had to get real because I had no money. I didn't have a halfpenny, so I had to get real somehow. And I had to get a job and start to think about doing other things.
God, it's a bit drastic, isn't it? It is a bit drastic.
It was an interesting. Yeah, it was like the end. I was only 23 then, so
God, yes, it was all over.
yeah, I thought it was all over at 23. And everything was weird. Like. Things like you're in the hacienda and someone would say, people would always be coming up to you and chatting to you about the band and stuff, and suddenly you go to the hacienda and nobody comes and talks to you.
No,
You're no longer famous.
like that's like,
Even walking down Market Street, kids would come up and go, "Hey, Big Flame, top action," or whatever, but you'd walk down Market Street and nobody would know who you were. It was.
yes, people, yeah, you used to be big. It's like, well, I haven't shrunk, but I'm still the same height. But yes, I know quite a few people who said they really, struggled after that period. Sometimes, like, especially the longer it goes on, and then it like finishes, and then there's like, oh my God, there's this tax bill, and now there's this debt, and now I'm gonna have to sell all the, we're gonna have to sell all the instruments, pay this off, and now we're completely broke. And no even musical instruments. I mean, and just walking around with depression for about a year or so.
Yeah, because it can be really. But I know people I know who've been in, who've been funded by a record label, and they've had guitars bought for them and amps and all sorts of stuff. Then the band splits up, and the record label say, "Yeah, can you give us all the guitars back? We'll have all the amps back, because you're massively in debt to us, and we'll flog these to the next sad muppets who sign up to EMI or whatever." So it's a cruel world really for kids.
Yes, it's a strange one. You have to sort of go, well, it could have been worse, but you know, but it is a bit tricky. And also that thing of learning that when a record label says, here's £1 million, you're immediately, that just disappears. And it's like, but bizarrely, you've gone from 1 million to minus 200,000. It's like, oh, I thought we just had, it's like, well, you've got this bill, you've got that engineer, you've got that studio, you've got that promotion, and all those little things that you're spending, we're keeping a tab on it as well. So bands like, I think Age of Chance had that experience, and
I think
Carter,
so.
the Unstoppable Sex Machine, said, we'll never own our music because the record label, we owe them, some ridiculous amount, but we didn't know that they were keeping a tab on
Tab on
everything.
it, yeah, and it's sad, and of course this had happened to black artists from time immemorial, hasn't it? And it's
Yes.
starting to happen to other, sorts of people because the whole system is pretty corrupt, really, and it feeds on, you know, basically throwing shit at a wall and seeing what sticks. But one A&R man told my dad, what with no idea what's going to make it, we just throw shit at the wall and see what sticks.
Right.
And then when it doesn't stick, they go, "Oh yeah, I know." My partner's father, he used to be he's a jazz musician, but he had a lot of friends in Sad Cafe, and
Oh,
uh,
yes.
and Sad Cafe were going on a world tour, and they got to Manchester Airport and to pick up the tickets for the flight, and the guy there saying, "It's all off. We've not sold enough tickets. We're cancelling your whole tour, and the band's over." And
Yes.
I knew I was 500,000. It was like that, just because it all went wrong. That punk happened and Sad Cafe weren't flavour of the month anymore.
Yeah, I know. Yeah, it must be absolutely. Yeah, it's. I think I remember Robert Plant once saying that moment where Led Zeppelin were over, John Bonham had died. He said that was the end of innocence. That kind of up to then it'd all been just like this is such an easy gig. My talent is so amazing, and it's like, boom, and it's like, oh, and I suppose that's the thing, isn't it? The wonder of youth and the naivety and enthusiasm. Yeah, and then it's a bit of a reality check. So then you have a project, don't you? Meat Mouth, which you released
Yeah,
one
yeah.
one
Well,
three-track single.
yeah, it wasn't really my project. Mark and Nick Blinko, who were big Flame fans from Rochdale, actually. I met up with them, and they said, "Oh, we've been recording some rap stuff, and we've been using Big Flame. We've been scratching Big Flame on there, but we'd quite like you to play guitar on our records." So I worked with them on that. I'm not, and that was good fun. We went on tour with the Age of Chance.
Right.
It was good fun. And actually, the record's not very good, but we got quite good later on, and because it was under rehearsed really, and as we played more gigs with the Age of Chance, we got better and better, and it was a bit of a shame really. And then that was on Factory. It was released on Factory Records, which was quite nice. Didn't get any money, but Tony Wilson really liked it, so he was quite happy to put it out, and
Yes. And then
so
and then sort of the 90s appears. Eric Cantona appears as well, and Roy
yeah.
Keane. But how do you then navigate the 90s period? Obviously, grunge had happened, Britpop was coming along, and yes, music had moved on. All those kids that came to see you were now sort of gracing the front page of the Melody Maker and going on top of the pops, weren't they?
Yeah, yeah, and well, yeah, people like Stone Roses, they were in Hume and we were in Hume, sort of our contemporaries really, and James, we one of our first ever gigs was with James, and even the wedding present, new fast automatic daffodils,
Oh
they were
yes.
big Flame fans, as were um, you know um, some of the other bands like what they called from Oldham, the ones from Oldham, what were they called? I can't remember. Um, what are they called? Oh, I'll think of
Oh,
the name in a minute.
we're stuck, aren't we, on that one? Oldham.
It's a song by Joe. There's a song called Joe in Spiral Carpets.
Oh
Bunch of
yes.
big Flame fans. Martin, particularly in the bass player, was a big Flame fan in there. So yeah, and they all went on to sort of make it. It was interesting from our day of the really being. We had to cultivate an audience. In between '83 and '86, it was a really weird time. There was no audience. Like every gig you did, you were like, where is everybody? And then suddenly Manchester happens, and even the smallest gig there is has got like 500 people trying to get in. You know,
Yes.
it was unbelievable the change in just a couple of years. From like 86 to 88, and you'd go to some like Conspiracy, the nightclub, and it's like there's 1,000 kids in Conspiracy, and they're all rough and tough and working class kids are into music again, and it's totally different, and it's so vibrant and stuff's happening, and there's people are making clothes again, people have got t-shirts, there's posters, it's just Manchester was absolutely amazingly beautiful, it was absolutely fantastic, and it was such a shame to have missed out on it all, really,
Yes, I
you know.
guess the ecstasy world had sort of come along, hadn't it? And there was a certain there was a bit more optimism really as the decade had gone on, and then the 90s it seemed it changed again, didn't it? So there was more money sloshing about, and obviously Manchester becomes the student place to go, wasn't it? Really?
Yeah, yeah, and you can see that, yeah, and it was, and then of course you got nightclub culture and wine bar culture. So there's loads of places to go and drink. We would drink. We once played in the Peveril of the Peak, which is a tiny pub. We played crouched on the pool table with a piece of hardboard over the pool table, doing a gig in there because there were only old men pubs to play in. And then suddenly there's Dry Bar, there's Atlas Bar, there's loads of interesting places to drink and hang out, and everywhere's full. It's such a real change. And
Yes, because it's
exciting.
interesting because you started the Wild Club, and then in Norwich on St Benedict Street, somebody starts a club also called the Wild Club as well with an E. So obviously, they must have went. They either stole it or it was just coincidence. But yeah, the indie nights were started to develop when you were kind of in your early years, really, wasn't it? These kind of evenings on a Monday or Tuesday or Wednesday,
Yeah,
where often those venues on art centres and old churches would struggle to put anything on, but then you'd put three gigs on or three bands on one night for £1.50, and
yeah.
off you went. And yeah, they're quite amazing. Some of those posters that you see being put up on social media. Just thinking,
Yeah, and I think it's a bit sad now that it's difficult to be a small band, isn't it? I think, which is a bit of a pity. You know.
yes, it is. Yeah, I suppose at the time you didn't realise that it was like quite fortunate. You could sort of vaguely survive. It was tricky. But then how does your academic life suddenly take off during the 90s? Is it the 90s that things developed so
Well,
quickly?
I became a research fellow on a project that after Big Flame, and then became a lecturer, and then a senior lecturer, and then a professor. And so. Yeah, that's been good because it's been creative too. Because it's in architecture, and I mainly do urban design, designing neighborhoods, trying to make them more sustainable and things. And
So
it's just
when
like
when when did you do your PhD?
I haven't done a PhD. No, I just blagged it.
But
No,
did you study at Leeds Met, or were
no,
you?
no, no. I studied at Manchester at Manchester Uni, and then I got a job at Salford. I got my first lectureship at Salford University. Then I got a lectureship at Manchester Metropolitan University, which became Manchester School of Architecture. That was fantastic. That was 1992. That was really good. I had a fantastic time there, doing loads of creative things, meeting loads of really interesting people, and doing installations in the city about situationist stuff, about so it's a bit like Big Flame, but sort of graphical, and ideas about how to change the world, and then I became head at Leeds, so I had to go to Leeds and I became head there, and that was good. Leeds is quite different from Manchester. I'd sort of imagined it would be the same as
Yes.
Manchester, but it's actually quite different. And that was good. And then I got headhunted to go to Belfast. And I thought, I think it was like I thought because Belfast is half Irish, half English or something,
Hmm.
and I thought I grew up in England, but my family are Irish. I thought I'll fit in. But actually, Belfast is nothing like Ireland, and it's nothing like Manchester, really. But I've grown to love it. I didn't think I'd be there for so long, but I love Belfast, and I've really loved being head at Queen's. So, really good, and met fantastic people. And actually, you know, I feel strongly Irish. Somehow, coming from an Irish family, and sort of having to live through the no blacks, no dogs, no Irish world of the
Yeah.
seventies. To survive that, I'm quite proud to be of Irish descent. And so being in Belfast is quite makes me quite happy.
So are you still a lecturer there, or have you?
Yeah, I'm professor of architecture and urbanism, so I'm half time. So I'm half retired now. So I decided at 60 to take a 4 year half retirement. So I got some of my pension, and I've gone half time, and it means that I can do other things. So
Yeah.
because I've got things on all over the world, so that I like to do that aren't necessarily so tied to being at the university. So I wanted a bit more freedom. So I'm going to Mexico for a couple of weeks in a couple of weeks' time. Doing a design project in Monterey. And things
Fantastic.
like that that it's difficult to possibly do if you're a full-time member of staff. So
Yes, absolutely. God, that's amazing. Yeah, that's fascinating. So then, did Nick from Precious Recordings of London approach you for the?
yeah, I think mainly I think Alan's a lot more connected with modern music than I am. So usually these things come through Alan. Alan, yeah, Nick contacted Alan, and we I think we've always been very precious about what we release, and we haven't let too much go out on too many things because we like to keep control of what's there. And we were worried about the graphics, of because Nick's got his corporate style. I think he had I think he had a bit of a laugh. Obviously, Alan was joking that he's going to have to deal with Greg and Dil about graphics, but we managed to come to a compromise where it's slightly big flame and slightly precious, isn't it? Just enough big flameishness to keep it big flame, but it's not quite their exact logo style.
Yes. So who kept the master tapes then of the recordings?
Yeah, yeah. Well, what we did, we kept all the master tapes, but when my brother's a studio engineer, so I asked him to remaster it, and he took all the tapes, and he said they're just full of crap.
Right.
He said they're 30 years old, whether they're more than 30 years old, and he says basically that you have to go and put them in a deep freeze to get a track off them,
Oh,
because all the little electrons have wandered around on the thingy. But so what he did, he re-recorded he's re-recorded all our songs off pristine singles that haven't been recorded, haven't been played before, because he said he could get much better quality off a record than he could off any digital recording.
right.
So
So
so he has so all the stuff on Apple and things and is actually all remastered by my brother, put through modern finalizers, which makes it sound fantastic. It can compress it without it sounding bad, and so we've got all those to release. We're intending to do a box set of 7-inch singles at some point in the future.
yes, it's got to be done. Have you
So
found any countries that are particularly fond of Big Flame? I mean, some people go, "Oh yeah, we were massive in Italy or Spain took us to heart,
yeah,
Germany." Did you
Holland,
find?
Holland and Germany, probably the biggest. We played there the most, I suppose. America as well, got quite a following in America. Just by
Yes.
looking at what comes in the inbox, I would say it's Holland, Germany, America usually are the three. countries that most. We did a lot of concerts in Holland with the X.
The
We used to sit
X.
there squat in Vermerville and went on tour with them a few times, and they're lovely people, and we had a lovely Dutch hippie time, eating cookies and good quality coffee, and and having a nice time with them.
So what's the, during the 80s then, I remember, Special Brew, a spliff, that kind of world. What was the recreational kind of drug and drink of choice during the kind of the 80s for an indie band?
Yeah, well, for us, we were drug free. We decided to be drug free.
Right.
So
And
we
and the drink of choice?
drink. For me, high quality real ale would be my thing.
Right.
Alan's more lager because he's Yorkshire. Dil like me, I think. So we used to be very controlled because obviously playing that music really fast, you couldn't be drunk doing it.
No.
So we had limits. We had limits on what could be drunk before we went on stage. So
Right.
the idea was that Dill wasn't allowed any drinking because the drums have to be completely on the button.
Yes.
Alan was allowed one to loosen his vocal cords, and I was allowed two. So and we used to stick to that really carefully because otherwise it could get very messy trying to play that fast. You know.
Yes. How long did a set last for? A Big Flame set?
9 songs. We used to do 9 songs, so 20 odd minutes. That was it.
You were like the Ramones of Manchester, weren't you?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Well, I saw the Ramones at Lancaster University, and they did 32 songs without any in between. Every time one ended, they just went 1, 2, 3, 4 and played the next. And I loved the rigor of that, the thing,
God.
and they were quite fantastic. And so I always thought that was another thing I'd like to try and reduce the amount of faffing between songs.
Yes,
You know,
twiddling around. Tune.
and,
You
and
didn't do that tuning up, the guitar for ages on end.
no, see, Alan had a really good ear, so I'd go ding ding, and he'd go, "Oh, your G string's just a little bit out," and I go, "Thanks, Alan. That's very handy," because he had a really good ear, So I didn't have to use one of those stupid little things where you watch the little needle go across and do all that, which I couldn't stand really.
No, my God. And with this project, have you communicated with each other at this point in life?
Yeah, only by email. I met Alan at in Glasgow a couple of months ago because the Mackenzies did a one-off gig in Glasgow, and so Alan's retired, I'm half retired, so we went up there, and that was really good. And so we had a chat, and I hadn't seen him since 1990. So
Right. That's
and so
amazing.
yeah, so that was good. And Dill, I haven't seen Dill since the year 2000, I don't think. But we chat on email about things, and we made an agreement that we'd never reform, that we'd always, you know, make a consensus decision about what we did with any recordings.
Yes, well, it's a
So
wise choice.
we've had no arguments because we've been offered a few reform things and we just said no, we don't reform. And then the music is usually quite easy to say we've got to have a better font than that, and then we all agree that, and and Alan's a nice person, so he's quite good at communicating the arsiness of me and Dill to humanity. He's always done that for us.
Nice. Yes. Well, we all need that kind of person sometimes, don't we? Do
Yeah,
the PR of the band. Yeah, well, that sounds brilliant. Well, I think this is going to be one of the most popular ones on the Precious recordings because, yes, it's you've the 80s. It was one of the key bands, wasn't it? Big Flame, really. So
yeah,
I hope it does well for Nick because he's such a star.
yeah, and yeah, and I think it's I just think that they're interesting documents, aren't they, for
Yes.
the time, and a place, and actually, I think. people who are really into Big Flame can enjoy it because they're very different recordings from the actual records, which I think is interesting. But also, I think it's quite interesting for kids in bands. You know, always, I get emails saying, "Can you tell me your guitar setup and which effects you use?" You know, I still get that now because the guitar sounds good. You know, and and so I always say, I just had a lead and a guitar amp. Because I once said to a kid who was backstage saying, "I really love the sound of your guitar," and I turned around to my guitar and said, "It's not making much noise now, though, is it?" You know, no, because actually it's me hitting it that makes the good sound.
Yes, I know.
And I hit it with I used to hit it with all my might, everything I had. So and I think that's what music should be like, and I like the idea of it being unfiltered, and it's actually your passion that's coming out of the speaker and not some fantastic effect.
Yes, well, absolutely, and also what I've really noticed in the last 5, 8 years is that that obviously there's lots of documentations, exhibitions, books coming out. People sort of looking at some of their, I don't know, I suppose the posters, the artwork, at that time, because the 80s used to be, the story of the 80s was told by a few people, and it was all rather, new romantics, new romantic live aid, told by people like Dylan Jones or somebody.
Yeah.
And then it's like, but there's all these other 80s, and there is a lot of it. And I think it's just kind of interesting that in the last, like I said, few years, it's all sort of coming out in different ways that makes it quite an interesting decade.
Yeah, and you look at bands like, say, Kneecap. They're part of the continuum of Big Flame, aren't they?
Yes.
They are. And actually they're absolutely brilliant. We've it's really important that all the different voices of youth culture get heard. And it really is, and something that we should celebrate more. Really,
Yeah. Yes, I think that's.
BBC just has Duran Duran and Wham on, calls it the 80s, or the Communards or something, and they're only one sort of 80s, aren't
Yes. Well,
they?
I think that's slightly, that I say slightly, that's really disappointing. That's why I think it's been quite nice that there's a lot more documentation that's gone on, and all that culture, with the bands, but then all the people, people organizing these gigs, and obviously realized they weren't ever going to make any money. But for a year or two, were there, they'd hear a band on John Peel, get them, down at the Norwich Arts Centre or whatever venue, the Duchess in Leeds
First
or
time
whatever.
the first time we played Glasgow, um, the guy who put us on was 15.
Yes, I know.
He rang us up and said, "I'm going to put a gig on." He'd never even been to a nightclub, and then his girlfriend the bouncers wouldn't let his girlfriend in because she was 15. And it's just that thing, isn't it? It was absolutely amazing. I always say, we went all around Europe with no manager, no grown up, and we're all 21. And we're in a transit van with all the customs documentation and everything, going all over Europe without any grown
Without a
up
sat nav.
without any grown-up assistance. We just did it all ourselves. It was
I
great.
know. It was, it's a hell of a learning curve, and but yes, the opportunity was just brilliant, and I just think, without romanticizing it, it was kind of creatively, it was just extraordinary, and so yes, it gave a lot of people sort of an opportunity to do things because, let's face it, the admission fee was probably £1.50p, wasn't it? It wasn't.
Yeah.
It wasn't going to be a big, expenditure, but
No.
happy days. But the thing is, when you got the John Peel session and you then went and did that tour around the UK, that you would probably get 100 to 200 kids turn up just because that was the moment, wasn't it? The John
Yeah,
Peel session.
we once played at Queen Mary College in London, and I got rung up by this guy who said, "I'm managing this new band called Texas, and we need a gig in London, and we're willing to pay. We only need to. We've only got 3 songs, so we just need to support you. And you're playing at Queen Mary College, and it'd be great." and they said, "How does 500 quid sound?" And I was like, "Yeah, I think we could perhaps do it for 500 because we're only getting paid 200 for the gig." So Charlene Spiteri turned up with her band to play these songs, and on the first song, someone threw a bottle onto the drum kit, and it smashed and nearly blinded the drummer. So they only played half a song, but we still got the 500 quid,
Yes.
which
God.
paid for my guitar. I got a new guitar out of it.
Amazing.
So
That's not quite as good as your Madonna story, but I have
no,
to say
no,
it's good. It's up there,
a
isn't
good
it?
one. Yeah,
It's a very good one. Rock and roll. Anyway, look, thank you ever so much for this,
yeah, it's
Greg.
a
That's
pleasure.
been amazing. And if you want, I can always send you the link to this, and you can always use it on your social media platform sites. I know Nick often uses them as well on his
Right,
sites. So hopefully it will be a massive success.
right,
We
okay.
hope, anyway. Good old Nick. Anyway, look, have a lovely evening, and yes, keep on
Yeah,
trucking.
nice to chat to you, David. Thanks for having me on.
Yes, take care. Have a lovely evening. See you later. Bye bye.
Laters, bye.
And that, dear listener, is obviously the end of the interview. A massive thank you to Greg for giving me the time for that. Big Flames, BBC John Peel Sessions, now out, available from all good streaming sites, well, basically Bandcamp, and that's the Precious Recordings of London. Anyway, this is the C86 show. If you want to contact me, you can on any of those social media platform sites. Just do C86 show David Eastaugh, and also all these fascinating interviews have been archived. Indeed, they have. On Spotify, iTunes, Podbean, and various other places. Anyway, fill your boots, they'll blow your mind. Have a great week. Stay safe.